Pretty sure the audience has heard the phrase resistance is futile. That is an idea that has been propagated for some time in Christian circles to the point where pacifism in different guises has been preached, admonished, and impressed upon hordes of believers as if it's something that Christianity not only denounces, but actively calls sin. However, upon closer inspection to what the text has to tell us, we find that resistance is not only encouraged by the Bible, it is a mandate. Not only a biblical mandate, a divine mandate from the Creator Himself. So the question that we are here to ask and answer is, why are so many pastors, churches, and Christians so quick and voraciously willing to teach this false doctrine over and against what the Bible has to say? I think the answers will surprise the audience, and we're here for all of it. Welcome to this new edition of Irrespective. For those of you that might be joining us for the first time, my name is Gio, my co-host, and I am his Jesus.
Good evening, friends. I think the verse, it's not the only one that we will be using tonight, but the verse that has been used over and over and over again to get us into this state of we cannot resist is Matthew 5:39. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. I think that's the one that has been used the most. Then we also have James 4:7. Therefore, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. And 1 Peter 5:8 and 9. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him. And as I mentioned these verses, you will find that it's one and the same Greek word that is used on all three. I'm not going to get into the pronunciation and how it was used. The only reason I mention it is because some people who immediately want to disagree with any and all things that we say will go, there's probably three different Greeks. We would like you to answer these questions, because every time that I come across one of these verses, difficult verses, where I've been told this is what Jesus is saying, but then I see Paul, Peter, and others from the first group of followers doing the opposite, I have to ask myself, were they disobeying Jesus, or do we have a faulty interpretation of a verse that has been turned popular for whatever reason? In this case, because they are calling resistance, any kind of resistance that we bring on the scene, they will call that wrong and disobedient.
Folks, we seem to be having some connection issues on our end. If you are convenience. So let me make sure that everything is good here. Just give me 1 second, please. Make sure that everything is being recorded here. Okay. Like I said, I'm sorry to interrupt the stream, but some of you, I guess, are reporting that you are seeing droppages on the stream. We seem to be having some issues with the live stream. Again, if there are lags or there are droppages, we seem to be experiencing issues with our internet here. Nevertheless, we are recording the episode so that if any more of this happens, we can upload it immediately after, and you will see the entire episode uninterrupted. For that, we apologize. So I think I'm trying to get my mind into this all here, because it's kind of difficult. You'll have to forgive me. It is difficult to keep the mind on the topic whilst also having to keep an eye on the technical side of things. First and foremost, let me say this from my vantage point. For years, I have attempted to impress upon believers that the pacifist branding of Christianity is one that necessarily goes against the testimony that we see in Christ himself. That's number one. Some of you might disagree with my assessment on the matter because when you hear the term pacifist, you'll say Jesus never advocated for us to constantly advocate for a state of revolution, or Jesus himself said that his kingdom is not of this world and we ought not seek to establish it by violent means. And Jesus tells Peter to sheathe his sword because those who live by the sword die by the sword. First and foremost, let me explain that by resistance, there are many different ways to resist. That's my second point in all of this. There are many different ways to resist. The inherent problem here is that we are running up against a generation of Christians that have been very comfortable in the West with the amount of, number one, religious toleration in a formerly Christian nation, but that is quickly slipping our grasp as we speak. And they felt as if, we don't even have to actively live in a Christian manner, and we're not really seeing all that much opposition because in the West it generally became Christianized. Therefore, we, as it were, dropped our guard. And also, this is the second point, yes, there is persecution in the West, and there has been, but not to the extent that other Christians continue to feel it to this day in other nations that don't have a history of being Christianized, as the United States has been, the UK, even though the situation there is pretty bad for those citizens and whatnot. So whenever you see the term pacifist, it seems to fit well in a modern context because everything has gone pretty well for Christians in the West for some time now, and therefore any advocacy for resistance immediately what comes to their mind and what gets launched by the pulpit or from the pulpit is as follows. No. Romans 13 and all these other verses I just mentioned, because in essence, you're disobeying God if you disobey the authorities. However, if you look at what the text actually says, you'll find something rather interesting that Christians over and over again from Christ and on, not only are they actively disobeying the orders of those whom are the superiors and they engage in evil, but also they are opposing Satan in his many different manifestations, either directly or indirectly, through his minions. So resistance is not a terminology that Christians should feel uncomfortable with. Matter of factly, Christians should actually get more comfortable with the idea of resistance because it is inherently biblical. It is something that Jesus modeled. It is something that the apostles modeled, and we'll go to the texts shortly to demonstrate the truth of the matter. And it is something that Christians themselves are commanded to do. This from the same, I mentioned all of this before because everything I said earlier, they'll quote those passages, sheathe your sword, and my kingdom is out of this world, all these other things that they tend to decontextualize and misinterpret. I find it interesting because one of the very texts that we find in the book of Revelation is that God has proper harsh words for cowards, saying that they will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the very same people who will quote that, then when you call evil evil, when you resist evil, when you resist the devil and his different schemes and his manifestations, they will tell you, why aren't you more loving? Why don't you engage these people more for Christ? They're euphemistic phrases meant for the allowance and subversion, the subtleness of evil to infiltrate itself. And they're actually co-participants in this advancement of evil when all they have to do is actively resist like the Bible commands. And maybe, just maybe, all this darkness that we're seeing nowadays, if Christians would have begun to be the dam, as it were, that impedes these things, maybe we wouldn't be where we are right now.
So I guess what you're saying, and I am in agreement with, there are different levels and types of resistance. And we can't go around saying this one yes, that one no. We must first come to terms with the fact that we have refused to engage in a biblical mandate, and that is to resist Satan and whatever manifestations he might have. Now, we have a series of questions that we want to ask, and we want you to answer, and we will be answering them also. But to Gio's point, and to what I mentioned previously, are these apostles, these first followers of Christ, disobeying Christ when they signal out, when they denounced evildoers? Take a look at Philippians 3:2 and ask yourself the question, was Paul disobeying Christ when he did what he did here? Well, what did he do? He called out the Judaizers. What do you mean? Well, beware of dogs, beware of evil workers, beware of the mutilation. Now, when I first started studying this verse, this is many, many years ago, I found that a lot of the interpretations, a lot of the additions, a lot of the things that were placed in the formal commentaries about this verse they're saying that Paul was calling out the Jews. And let's face it, as you take a look at the book of Acts, you'll notice that the ones that were saying you must circumcise yourself, you must be circumcised, were the Jews. And this is exactly what is being dealt with here. Beware of dogs, beware of evil workers, beware of the mutilation. So, is Paul disobeying Christ by calling out these Jews that were going around saying you must be circumcised if you want to be saved? Was he disobeying Christ? Well, some will say, well, wait a minute. He never said resist them. What Paul said was beware. I get that you are going to want to play with the words, but the fact that it's in a letter sent to the Philippians, is this not a form of resistance? Because they'll say, no, Paul never said to resist them. Paul said, beware of dogs, beware of evil workers, beware of the mutilation.
I thought just by writing the letter and warning people and denunciation, that is a form of resistance.
But that is the point. But people will come up to you and say, he never said resist them. He said just beware, beware. But the fact that he wrote the things that he wrote and he's pointing them out and he's denunciating what they're doing, he is resisting them.
I'm going to say something that a lot of people are not going to like, because a lot of Christians like this sort of messaging that emanates from the pulpits, which in essence says as follows: be at peace with everyone. But curiously enough, that messaging runs contrary to the advancement of the gospel, and I'll explain why. There is this thing that abides in all men that Christians have to actively fight against, which is trying to be liked by everyone. There's a system that our parents, good parents, teach us from a very early age called peer pressure. And even if you don't have parents teaching you this is something that you actively get to encounter and are exposed to. And you have to make a decision as to whether or not you're going to submit to that spirit of the age. Are you going to get along just so as to not be criticized and go with the current? Or are you going to swim against the current and all of the implications of that very same thing? But Christians for many years now have demanded that the pulpit doesn't preach a message of resistance for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of the advancement of the same, and for the sake of everything that is good and true and beautiful. Why? Because we don't want to be seen as outcasts. We don't want people to have a bad opinion of us. Therefore, we approach with this messaging this evening, which is biblical, as we are beginning to give you proof, and then you'll have those whom will reach for certain texts trying to defend a system which intentionally misinterprets the Bible so that they can protect a scheme that allows them to not be seen as contrarian, as opposition, as not nice people by those whom are trying to destroy you, by those whom are operating as Satan's minions. I want you to think about how crazy that system not only is, but how it actively works against the dissemination and the good of the gospel and of living a gospel-centered existence. It is subversive. It needs to stop. And any Christian that aids and abets it by using euphemisms, as I recently found out from someone who says, if you say that thing with that particular tone to that person, you're not acting in love. So it's not that I'm telling them the truth for the sake of their salvation.
Tonality.
It's the tonality. Notice the essential stupidity of that very idea, but it's something that has become very popular. The reason I'm using that to dovetail into what we're talking about is because Jesus himself, when he actively spoke out against evil, he was engaging in resistance. But today's Christian will even tell Jesus Christ.
Just showing up on earth is resisting what Satan had been doing. Furthermore, the Bible says he showed up to destroy Satan, to destroy his works.
Right.
Now, what Gio was talking about is Romans 12:18. If it's possible, notice the words, if it's possible, as much as depends on you. This is a New King James Version.
That's an important qualification.
And I'm going to bring up an example that people will remember. Live peaceably with all men. It seems like we forget that just a few years ago, they were imposing or trying to impose on Christian churches that our bathrooms can no longer be strictly for male and female. If you don't recall that, then you need to go back, use your computer, use your favorite search engine, and search for those things because it wasn't that long ago. We're talking about 4.5, 5 years ago. It was about 5 years ago, maybe 5.5 years ago, that we were told you must shut down your churches. If you don't, we will come and arrest you. If people show up in the house of worship, we will arrest you. If they dare think that they can sit next to each other and they don't keep space, we will arrest you. And of course, most of the churches submitted to that. What makes us believe that they won't come up with similar issues to continue to destroy what we believe, what we know we must be engaged in? And what do Christians say to all of this? Well, this is just the way God wants it. This is His will. There's nothing that can be done. But I think through reason and through logic and following the Bible, Jill, I think we can prove without a shadow of a doubt that we are called to resist.
I'm going to give a couple of examples here. And I know what some of you will say. Gio, what you're necessarily implying is that there are contradictions in the text. And I'm going to tell you something. These are things that you're going to have to grapple with, because one text might say one thing. Another text might say something that seems to diametrically oppose that very thing. And as it pertains to resistance, as it were, we're talking about one of those things where unless you understand the proper context, you could fall in a place that isn't necessarily healthy. I'll explain shortly. Let me give you an example. John chapter 2. A lot of theologians, and I tend to agree with them, they'll say that this is a second, or rather a first of 2 times that Jesus cleanses the temple. Some people think that the narration of Matthew, of Mark, and of John are one and the same, covering the same event. But others have said, no, there seems to be distinct differences here where Jesus actually cleanses the temple twice. And this, early on in John's gospel, you'll notice it in John chapter 2, is an indication, as it were, that this was probably the first time that Jesus cleanses the temple. And notice the violent way in which he does it. Chapter 2, verse 13, now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. I found it interesting how John, being an ethnic Jew, writes about the Jews in the third person, not like he belonged to them.
Their synagogue.
Right. Interesting.
That's the way he expresses himself.
Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers doing business. And we had made a whip of cords. Sounds pretty violent to me. He drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money and overturned the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise. Then his disciples remembered that it is written, zeal for your house has eaten me up. So the Jews answered and said to him, what sign do you show us since you do these things? And Jesus answered and said to them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. He's talking about himself, of course. Now, I have to ask you all a question, and this is something you're going to have to grapple with. And trust me, my intention is not to be a shipwrecker of your faith. It's not to be a stumbling block, but these are things that you have to confront because they're written in the text. We read in Matthew chapter number 5 that Jesus says that we should not be resisting evil people, that if you're slapped on the cheek, you should turn the other. If they steal, as it were, your tunic, you should give them your coat as well. And if you're demanded that you walk 1 mile to go the second with that person. But I ask you a question, was Jesus not resisting evil in this act? Because these people were defiling something that God had instituted. And granted, Jesus was operating under the old covenant. I understand all of that, but nevertheless, this is a violent action that Jesus not only did not overlook, he actually did something about it. We read in Acts chapter number 4 that the disciples defiantly told the Sanhedrin, we're not going to stop preaching the gospel. These are acts of resistance. So I ask you then, did Jesus contradict himself? Or is there something else here that we need, as it were, proper explanation? Because again, the same person who tells us if they slap you on the cheek, you're going to turn the other one is the same one who made a cord or a whip of cords and violently threw out the money changers. He dispensed their business, their immoral business off of the temple grounds. And I know some of you say, boy, that's a pretty heavy implication. But what I see here is not what some people see with respect to Matthew chapter 5, where they interpret it as meaning, you know what, we basically have to let evil go unabated because it's the way to show the love of God. And I see in other instances like this one, for example, in Acts chapter 4, and Jesus telling the disciples in Luke 22. Remember how I told you before, go on the road without all of these provisions, you're going to be provided by God, as it were, by me. Now you're going to take a sword to defend yourself. I actually see that God is preparing, as it were, the disciples for this new reality that they're going to confront, where, guess what? It is sanctioned by heaven. It is sanctioned by God to not only actively resist evil, it is commanded by God, and there is no wrong in doing it.
So let's tackle a couple of questions, and hopefully we can arrive at a biblical conclusion, a biblical answer to all of this. Are we Christians called to resist Satan? James 4:7 says we are.
Resist the devil, and he will flee.
Second question.
No. But remember, that's just in your inner man, spiritually,
That's
by
what they say.
prayer, and right?
That's what they say. It's just for your own benefit. It's saying no to temptation. It's saying no to evil. Well, let's continue the questionnaire here. Question number 2. Am I called to resist him just on my own behalf, just for me, or on behalf of others? Well, I think it's just for me. I can't resist for others. I can only resist for myself. So why would Jesus have you go out and about casting out demons? Well, that's different. Are the demons doing the work of Satan? Well, yes. And if you're casting them out, are you not resisting Satan? Well, and how about all the things that Paul wrote about the armor of God and bringing down strongholds? That's not resistance? What is that? The thing is that you've heard over and over, you must not resist, you must not resist. And anything that people like you and I bring to you saying, you need to take a closer look at, you automatically go, these two are wrong, these two are wrong. No matter how many verses they show me, these two are wrong because this is what I have been taught. Question number 3. If I must resist Satan only for myself, on my behalf, am I selfish, Gio? Am I unloving of my neighbor? Am I not lacking love for my neighbor if I only resist for myself?
You know, if I can take a moment to answer that, because I know there will be the sanctimonious types whom will say that, in a sense, that demonstrates yours, mine, whatever the case may be, self-centeredness in the matter. I'm going to tell you all something. A big portion of life, whether you want to admit it or not, is self-interest. Absolutely it is. It is self-interest. But the quicker you become comfortable with that, the quicker it'll be for you to actually make decisions that not only will benefit your self-interest, but you'll understand that they also have interest for the brethren, for the body of Christ, for your fellow citizens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For example.
But there's nothing wrong with self-interest as long as you keep in mind what the Bible teaches.
You see, exactly.
Bring in your neighbor into the interest
exactly.
that you have in mind.
But then a lot of pastors and a lot of Christians will tell you, no, from the base point and from the baseline, no, you can't have any self-interest whatsoever. Might I remind the audience ad nauseum what John Piper said years ago, and he still stands by it? If a rapist were to enter his house, it would be the most gospel-centric thing to let that rapist rape his wife, because that's the way to preach the gospel. That's in essence how. So what concern then does he have for his neighbor, which would be his wife? You see, the ludicrous nature of sanctimonious Christianity, as I call it, actually subverts the advancement of good. And what it does is that it actually holds back good so that evil can advance. But we feel better about ourselves.
So you
somehow.
agree that we resist Satan not only for ourselves, but for our neighbors?
Absolutely.
Question number 4. Is Satan the originator of evil, the very essence of evil?
Yes.
I would say yes. 1 John 3:8, the devil has sinned from the beginning. He, the devil, was a murderer from the beginning and the father of lies. John 8:44. So if I resist Satan, am I resisting evil?
Yes.
And if I am resisting Satan and I am resisting evil, and I am called to resist Satan and evil, not just for myself, but for my neighbor, where am I going wrong?
You're not doing
what am I
anything
doing wrong?
You're not doing it. But again, my point is that, and I'm going to use phrases that some people might get offended with, but that's fine. You can be offended with it. A lot of Christians have their underwear in twists and in knots when you say things like this. Why? Because at the end of the day, the religion that has been presented as Christianity is make sure you do nothing to have sinners offended with us, dislike us in some way, shape, or form. And the disguise, the cloak, is the language of no, but you have to be gospel-centered and you have to be Christ-like. Jesus was not looking for favorable opinions. Get that through your thick skulls. And I mean that as respectfully as possible. I know it sounds condescending, but that's a fact. Jesus was not looking for favorable opinion. Jesus was looking for the salvation of people. And if that meant that people got angry with him, oh well, that's the attitude that we Christians have to adopt.
Well, now it's going to get a little bit tougher for a lot of people. If I resist Satan, I am resisting evil, not just for myself, but for my neighbor. Question number 6. Are the people assisting Satan aiding and abetting evil?
Absolutely.
Listen to what Jesus said. You are of your father, the devil. Who did he say that to, Gio?
He said that to the Jews.
And the desires of your father you do want to do. John 8:44.
Yep.
Again, are the people assisting Satan aiding and abetting evil? And the answer is yes.
Yep.
If the answer is yes, should I resist them?
Yes.
By deduction, the answer has to be yes. Can you go through that again? Absolutely. Are the people assisting Satan aiding and abetting evil? The answer is yes. And Jesus said so. You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. John 8:44. If the answer is yes, should I resist them? By deduction, the answer must be yes. That was question 7. Number 8. Given that Jesus taught that I am either for him or against him, there is no middle ground.
Doesn't seem to be a middle ground there.
Exactly. If I don't resist Satan's assistance and or evil people, am I assisting evil?
You are aiding and abetting evil.
So you can't just leave this at, I'm just resisting him when he tempts me, when he whispers in my ear. You can steal that and nobody will notice. Or, in that particular case with that little girl, that she seems to be demon possessed. All right, go ahead and cast a demon out of her, but don't go beyond that, okay? And it's just like the Pharaoh. So God said that you would like to worship him. Okay, go ahead and worship him, but do it here in Egypt. Don't go too far. And he kept trying to relax what God was saying. Folks, these are simple questions that we're asking, and the answers are very simple. Given that Jesus taught that I am either for him or against him, there is no middle ground. If I don't resist Satan's assistance, those that aid him, talking about evil people, am I assisting evil? Absolutely. Then, if I disobey, question number 9, then if I disobey the interpretation of Matthew 5:39 that teaches me not to resist evil people, am I rebelling against God? No. Obviously, people have misconstrued Matthew 5:39 because we have just answered a series of questions, and I think we've done a clear job of it, a precise job of it, that starting with Jesus himself, followed by Paul, we see both of them resisting Satan, yes, resisting evil people,
Yep.
evil movements, evil groups. So what's the problem?
Yep.
Well, this just seems very new to me. It seems very strange to me. And I don't know if I can engage. You have to engage. Because if you say, I'll resist them in my own terms and just about saying no to drugs and and saying no to whatever evil knocks on my door, then what about loving your neighbor?
Yep.
What about loving your neighbor as you love yourself? You see, there are things that when you think about them, initially you go, well, that's a bit strange. I'll go back to Philippians 3:2, Gio, if you don't mind. I'll
Sure.
take another minute for this. Beware of dogs. Beware of evil workers. Beware of the mutilation. I get a kick of the translations because they try to hide certain things that are very obvious if you just pay attention. He's talking about Judaizers.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, but again, you missed the plot there because he said, beware. Just be aware that they are there. The fact that he writes this, that he sends it to a church, to a group of churches, and these churches were to share these letters, and then it's reached us. The fact that he does this, Paul is resisting them.
Yep.
Otherwise, you know what? To this day, every time a man came to Christ, what would be asked of that man? You must circumcise yourself. And all
And Paul
Christians,
calls that issue from the Judaizers to the Galatians, he calls it a bewitching.
and we would be involved in works and not in grace.
Yep.
Here's another one that I have for you. We've been told to honor our father and our mother. Have we not? What about if your dad sells drugs? What about if your mom runs a brothel? Oh, but you're taking these things to extremes. You have to do this because otherwise people will bring everything under a neat little cloud just for themselves, Gio. And they'll go, no, no, no. I must honor my father and my mother, no matter what. If my dad is a pusher, if my dad is a mafioso, if my mom is a prostitute, if she is selling drugs, how can I honor that? Am I not honoring evil? And by honoring evil, am I honoring or dishonoring God?
I think when you examine this topic, as we have in the short time that we've been live on this, and this is something that we can continue talking about for hours because there are so many ways to get lost in the weeds on the topic. And by lost in the weeds, I mean there's extension to this topic in many, many, many different ways. You know what? Before I actually say that, let me say the following because I think a clarification is even more in order in all of this. Some of you, based on what I said earlier, will say, well, Gio, there is no correlation over your mentioning of Matthew chapter 5 with resisting an evil person and the way that Jesus and the apostles resisted evil in the way that you guys are describing it.
So there were no people behind those activities? It was just an activity that sustained itself?
So let's take this to its logical end.
Mm-hmm.
If Christians are never, ever, ever, ever to resist any form of evil at all, what ends up happening with evil? Doesn't it advance abated? Doesn't it advance unabated? Well, Gio, this is where you begin to notice by asking these questions, these logical questions, that Christians now begin to tie themselves in knots because they haven't really thought through these issues. And I ask the question again, if you do not resist evil, like the Bible clearly tells us that we have to, then what happens? You actually aid and abet evil. But that's not what Jesus meant in that passage. So, dear theologian, I would ask you, what was Jesus then intending in that passage? And I know what the popular explanation of that text is. It is that, well, by doing good unto evil people, you will win them, as it were, to the gospel. I understand the
The
concept.
Pharaoh responded to that?
I'm glad you bring that up.
He
because
had to take a whooping before he responded.
And there's people that, by the way, even though you do good to them, it doesn't matter how many times they will not respond at all. As a matter of fact, they would see that and interpret it as an opportunity for you, as it were, to be their doormat, to be a carpet, as it were, to be their rug. And then you have to ask yourself the question, well, the implications of that basically means that I'm advancing this idea that we Christians just sit down and take it all the time. You see, once you start considering these things, you have to ask yourself, wait a minute, is it very possible that the very popular interpretations of the things that we read in the commentaries and books written about this or the sermonizings on this might actually be quite a few degrees off of what the intention of the passage was? Because now we find ourselves in a pickle in that this text would say this thing and it's interpreted in this way, but then immediately after we begin to see other texts that demonstrate, as it were, a resistance to evil, once again, staying within the topic, and act not only a violent resistance to evil, in many instances, yes, there would be, as it were, a more pacifist, some will say, resistance to evil. So these are things that Christians have to grapple with because these are the complexities, as it were, of life, and you have to learn how to, as it were, adopt, or rather address these things, as it were, in an individual way. But going back to what I was going to say earlier, I think it's important that we understand once and again that the popular messaging up until this point has been driven, and I deign, as it were, to repeat myself, I deign to be redundant in this, but I can't drive the point home enough. Most of the messaging that has come from the pulpits and Christians have adopted has been because they just want to be liked. And this is what people have adopted. And they say amen to that. When we actually see that the Bible not actively only encourages us, but commands us, including some of the questions, the rhetorical questions that you asked this evening, for us to actively condemn and resist evil. I go back to something that was a culture war up until recently, and it continues to rage on. And I ask myself, where were the Christians in the midst of this? Because for years, I had heard Christians complaining about men going into women's bathrooms. Well, where were the men to stand in a line in those bathrooms and say, you guys that you think you're women, you're not coming in here? No, we can't do that. Why can't you do that? That's a question to ask. I get it. There are those whom said, but there's different layers to this because, women, the feminists, they tend to I get all of that. What I'm saying is that I'm trying to use this as an example to point that just with a little bit of active resistance, maybe we, the church, could have pushed back all of this evil that now plagues our nation, that plagues this world. But guess what? We were too busy wanting to be liked and not disliked.
If what we have been taught to this point is the key, it'll bring about the results that God wants. What are the results that He wants? That your kingdom come, that your will be done as it is in heaven here on earth. Why are we seeing everything but that? The contrary is what we are seeing. When you decide, I am going to resist evil, you need to understand what we said at the beginning. There are different ways, different levels of resistance. If you demand via your vote that no money be given to abortion clinics, you are resisting evil. Well, yeah, I can see myself getting involved with that. If you extrapolate, if you continue to think on the things that you can do so that evil does not continue to progress, then you will find that you will be in a better position, a much more pleasing position unto God than the religious posture that you've been told this is the one that you should take and uphold, which basically allows evil to run amok. It's really very, very simple. I'll go back to the COVID days when they were doing with us as they please. Who was they? The government and all the people that saw that as an opportunity to destroy as many Christians and churches as possible. Behind the scenes, I guess some of you forget how the IRS was working against the Christian churches to destroy us. If you don't see these things, if you don't resist them, if you don't do what is available to you that you must do, then you're helping them along. Every time you are called to resist and you don't, you are helping evil go along and accomplish what they wish to accomplish. I know it's a difficult topic, and it's one that I'm sure you've heard. Yeah, but Paul says that I must defeat evil with good. I get it. I get it. I've read that. I have preached over that. But the thing is that, to Gio's point, the way that you interpret that is, I must allow them to run amok. No. If they have an idea, and it's an evil idea born out of Satan's heart, why would you keep quiet about your idea, which is born out of God's heart? No, you announce it. You denounce what they're saying. You get into the debate. You challenge them to a debate. You do what you have to do to make sure that you expose that evil lie, that you expose that evil idea. You do what you have to do. And now you are defeating, it's another form of defeating evil with good, because if you don't have good ideas, if you don't have a good presentation, if you don't have a good debate, how can you sit there and watch this person lie to others? You know that they're misleading people, and you go, I guess there's nothing I can do about that. Challenge them. Challenge those ideas. Call them out. Make sure that you have enough preparation to say, hey, I want to debate you on this, and make them look foolish. You have just defeated evil if you're successful in this way. And it's not just like the simplified version. Well, I must let them get away with that. Otherwise, I'm not being a good witness to Christ. And once you defeat them with a better argument, once you win the debate, if that person is hungry, feed them. And now you have done the really extraordinary things. Not only did you show him or her for what he or she is, evil, but you also showcase the fact that your heart is still intact, and that if he or she whom you have just defeated is hungry, you feed them. This is the way I think we need to proceed. Otherwise, we're fighting a losing battle.
Yep, I agree. Folks, we would invite you, first and foremost, to join us on Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. By the way, it seems as if the rest of the edition went off streaming properly without a hitch, so thank the good Lord for that. We encourage you to watch on Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We normally stream every Sunday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and Wednesday this evening, of course, as we have at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What we have for our audience, this next edition is going to be interesting. I thought that my days of criticizing Dr. Russell Moore would be over. Evidently, we're not done. This guy is still involved as a subversive of sorts to try to infiltrate churches with liberal progressive ideas, masquerading as Christianity proper. And the latest article that he provides so-called insights to with a Mike Cosper and philosopher Brandon Rickabaugh reads as follows. ChatGPT announces new erotica feature. And in an X post, it links to an article which reads, how does ChatGPT's new erotica content offer opportunities to share the gospel? I'll let that sit for a little bit. We're going to take up some of the points, if you can call them points, that these three workers of iniquity bring forth in this article, and we're going to challenge them.
We're going to resist them.
We are going to resist them because this is one of the things that we were talking about inherently this evening. We've got people whom, under the name of we're going to give you Christians a better way, what they're actually encouraging people to do is, Christians, just go along with this because it's not as bad as you think it is. And as long as we tilt this in a way, shape, or form to the gospel or toward gospel centrism, whatever they call it, we can make a bad situation good, instead of simply saying to people, this is a sin, stay away from this. No, that would make people dislike us. So we're going to tackle the things that they say in this article on Sunday, and we hope that you'll join us then for the next edition of Irrespective.
It seems like we have forgotten the amount of pastors that were saying, yeah, we have to join BLM. How did that go?
Yep. Didn't Joel Osteen walk with them? He marched with them.
Why are they not apologizing to the rest of us who were saying, stay away from that? Why are they not apologizing for submitting to any and all things COVID when all the facts are now coming out? And as it turns out, we had it right and we were resisting that. Where are the apologies?
Yeah.
It seems like they understand that people have a short memory span and that they move on and they keep sticking it to you. They will continue to stick it to you unless you decide enough is enough.
That's on Sunday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We also encourage you to donate. It helps us to continue to put out this content for your edification. I'm pretty sure you're noticing we're not doing the conventional Christianity thing here. As a matter of fact, that's our express motto on Irrespective. We challenge conventional Christianity because there's a lot wrong with conventional Christianity. And if you'd like to help us to continue along in this mission, we would encourage you to do a couple of things. Number one, donate. It helps us to continue to put out this content for your edification. There's a QR code on the upper left corner of the screen. Scan it. Conversely, to donate, you can click on the link beneath the video player in the description box. It leads you to PayPal's services, where we're using that service to process patronages and donations. And beforehand, for those of you that have been giving, we thank you for that. And we also thank those of you that will be giving for the first time. Absolutely. Follow us on X at Irrespective77. And last but not least, do not forget to subscribe, whether you're watching us on X, whether you're watching us on YouTube, whether you're watching us on Rumble. Subscribe on YouTube and on Rumble, whether you're watching us on either of those. Hit the notification bell and click on the thumbs up. That way, the algorithms were to pick up that there's organic interest in this content, and they'll begin to share also our content with others. And please spread the word of Irrespective. If you enjoy this content, one of the best ways that you can help us to spread the word is you linking to our content and sharing it with others. So with that, we sign off for this evening, and we thank you for watching. Glitches, of course, notwithstanding. Until the next occasion that we gather, may the Lord shine his face upon you.